I did as well as I could for as long as I could, Mattis writes in excerpts from his new book, Call Sign Chaos.
That is Jim Mattis's upcoming book, and there has been an excerpt of that book published in the Wall Street Journal. And in it, we get a clear idea of how Mattis really felt working for the Trump administration, something he didn't plan on doing, something he was surprised by when he was called on Trump and nominated by him. And what's fascinating is how even after everything went down, Mattis is still avoiding attacking Trump specifically by naming him. So I'm gonna read you some of the excerpts that stood out to me the most. But before I do so, I do think it's important to give you a sense of how the Atlantic covered this story, because they have a little more insight into the way Mattis really felt about Trump. Mattis often seemed burdened in his role. His aides and friends say he found the president to be of limited cognitive ability and of generally dubious character.
So they interviewed Mattis. That's why they have more insight into it.
Right.
And they also obviously talked to his friends and allies. And so Mattis, I'm actually frustrated by it. He writes a whole book and says, well, I'm not gonna really tell you what I think. He says he still has, quote, a duty of silence. And he said, there is a period in which I owe my silence. It's not eternal, it's not going to be forever. Dude, what difference does it make after Trump's out of office? Your duty is to the country,
right?
And it's to tell the truth right now. If you know the president is of dubious character and limited cognitive ability, we should know that before we decide whether to give him another 4 years as president of the United States. So
I mean, we've decided.
Yeah, no, but we have, but the country hasn't. And so his former defense secretary telling us what he actually knows would be incredibly relevant. If you think, well, that would make it political. The whole world is political. So and keeping the information from the American public is also a political decision. You know it, you should share it before we in a democracy make up our mind about who to lead us. But all that notwithstanding, it's fairly clear from what he says. So let's take a look at it, and then I wish he would give more details though.
Sure. So first, a few more mentions from the Atlantic that I think are important. Mattis and Tillerson had together smothered some of Trump's more extreme and imprudent ideas, but now Mattis was operating without cover. Trump was turning on him publicly. 2 months earlier, he had speculated that Mattis might be a Democrat. He's not, trust me, and said in reference to NATO, I think I know more about it than he does. So this is kind of setting the stage for the, deterioration of the relationship between Trump and Mattis. Also, Mattis made his case for keeping troops in Syria. Trump rejected his arguments. 30 minutes into the conversation, Mattis told the president, quote, "You're going to have to get the next Secretary of Defense to lose to ISIS. I'm not going to do it." He handed Trump his resignation letter, a letter that would soon become one of the most famous documents of the Trump presidency thus far. We covered that story when it broke. Also, nations with allies thrive, Jim Mattis writes in the excerpt of his book. Nations with allies rise and those without them wither. Alone, America cannot protect our people and our economy. At this time, we can see storm clouds gathering. A polemicist's role is not sufficient for a leader. A leader must display strategic acumen that incorporates respect for those nations that have stood with us when trouble loomed. I mean, he's calling him a polemicist, like.
Obviously, and he's saying that he doesn't have acumen. That means he's not smart. Now, luckily, Trump is dumb enough that he won't understand that paragraph. So he won't read it and he won't understand it, so it'll be fine. So look, Mattis being a Democrat, hilarious. First of all, one of the reasons he left is because he wanted to stay in Syria longer. Progressives don't want to stay in Syria longer, and his idea is a perpetual war. So I don't agree with Mattis substantively or strategically. And let's also note for the record, as he's being lionized now by the anti-Trump forces, which is significant in the media, that Mattis also only turned on Trump when Trump turned on him.
100%, yes.
And so, I mean, he was a good soldier, if you will, before Trump started publicly insulting him. So, and then he left, and now he writes this half-measure book.
Yes.
Look, having read some of the book, the excerpts that have been released so far, I get it that Mattis is a fairly principled guy, strategic, and he's not a person of low character like Donald Trump. And he is clearly smart, so he has upsides. But I want, like, no one else will talk about his downsides, and we've got to give you a fuller picture. Now, having said that, who's right and wrong between Mattis and Trump? Only blinded MAGA guys would dispute that Mattis is correct.
Right. Look, I think the thing that's frustrating about all of this is the reasons that you mentioned earlier. I mean, the fact that he's being lionized now, the fact that he's being applauded for doing this half measure and calling Trump out a little bit. But at the same time, I mean, Trump is the lowest bar, right?
Yeah.
So anyone who's having a debate and they're saying, well, Mattis is better than Trump. Well, yeah, most people are better than Trump, right? Most people that we've disagreed with politically for years are better than Trump. But in a way, when it comes to people like Mattis, when it comes to members of Trump's administration right now, they're worse in that they have absolutely no courage and don't understand the importance of their role, right? And how this country is supposed to be governed, how there are supposed to be certain protections against an authoritarian character like Donald Trump. I mean, he was supposed to challenge Trump from within the administration. Yes, Trump wants to surround himself with yes men, and he will turn on you the second you don't give him anything and everything he wants. But at the same time, you're right in that he didn't turn on Trump until Trump publicly turned on him, and it's interesting because Trump turned on him over the issue of Syria, which is what we actually agreed with Trump on.
Yeah, and so he says in the book, Mattis says, our own commons seems to be breaking apart. And he talks about our internal divisiveness and then says this, all Americans need to recognize that our democracy is an experiment and one that can be reversed. We all know that we're better than our current politics. Tribalism must not be allowed to destroy our experiment. Yeah, okay, well then say it, man. He's clearly saying that Trump is dividing us and ripping us apart and that our democracy is in danger. He's clearly saying that to people who are smart enough to understand that. But remember, most MAGA guys and low information voters are not gonna read all of Mattis's book. They're not even gonna read an excerpt in the Wall Street Journal and get to the 28th paragraph. And they're not gonna take a sentence like that any smart person knows what he intends and understand it. You have to actually say the words. Trump is breaking us apart. Trump is dividing this country, and I'm worried Trump might end democracy. If Mattis said that instead of this sophisticated sentence, it would be national news everywhere. It would be headlines all across the world, and people will go, whoa, his former defense secretary is saying that Trump might end democracy. So just, God damn it, be clear. You owe a duty to the Constitution, to the country. If you think that our democracy is in peril, which is what you wrote, then you owe a duty to this country to say it more clearly.
I couldn't agree more. And just remember, there are people still serving for Trump who will, do these leaks. They'll go talk to the press and talk about how concerned and worried they are. You'll have someone publish an anonymous op-ed in the New York Times talking about how there are adults in the room who are keeping an eye on Trump, but no one is really coming out publicly and calling it what it is. And Mattis talks about tribalism, but that tribalism is perpetuated by people like him who protect the president and refuse to really call him out and do what's necessary, maybe even work with Democrats to get him out of office, to impeach him.
Or work with Republicans in a primary, I don't care.
Right.
And so, look, last thing on this is that the reason I now totally get why fascism wins. Like when I was younger and I used to visit museums and I saw the Holocaust Museum, etc., or Museum of Tolerance here in LA, I couldn't believe it. How could they not see it? How could they not see it? Because it creeps up on you. And then there's the bureaucrats. And the bureaucrats just go along and go, oh, I'm gonna say that our democracy is in peril when we have tribalism, blah, blah, blah. And then the bully comes in and he steamrolls everybody.
Right.
And Mueller comes in and goes, well, my remit and my, purview was the election, even though the giant Russian business ties were staring me in the face. Since I was not within the letter of my mandate, I did not look into it. And I'm just going to repeat what my report says in very carefully worded language. These bureaucrats are getting steamrolled because they're not used to dealing with a fascist. So Mattis, you talk about in your book how a Marine is supposed to adjust. You don't just go into the battlefield with the plan you have. Once you hit the battlefield, you're supposed to adjust. And he says it in even more eloquent terms, right? Well, you gotta adjust right now. So yeah, you like the Republicans, you like perpetual war. I get it, we disagree on that, right? And you say, well, if I like the Republicans and I served a president, the old code is I don't say anything about the president. But we're at a time where you think the president might end democracy. So you've got to adjust and you've got to be clear. And so right now it's a small little story that intellectuals go, hey, look at that, can you believe that?
Right, yeah.
And everyone else ignores. If you want the message to be heard, you've got to be loud and clear, and a Marine should know that. 2 easy ways to follow the Young Turks. One is hit the subscribe button down below, then you're a TYT subscriber. And second is ring the bell. And when you do that on YouTube, you're notified of our videos.